If you want to find a 3,000-year-old ancient Egyptian relic, you could, search the endless, heavily guarded marble corridors of the Louvre in Paris.
Right. Or the British Museum.
Yeah, or the massive halls of the British Museum. Or you could look inside a cardboard box marked miscellaneous sitting in the back room of a small volunteer-run stone building in an isolated Scottish fishing village.
It is, it's quite the contrast. I mean, I'm actually looking at some historical maritime maps of the Orkney Islands right now, just to sort of set the scene for the listener. The sheer geographical isolation we are talking about here it's striking.
It really is.
You have this small coastal town of Stromness, surrounded by the rough waters of the North Sea and the Atlantic. And yet, the local museum there holds an inventory that spans from ancient African civilizations all the way to, like, highly experimental Arctic exploration gear.
Which is just wild to think about. And that's why today's deep dive is entirely focused on this one location. We are taking a single Wikipedia article about the Stromness Museum and uncovering how this one, seemingly niche, independent institution acts as a secret portal to the entire world's history.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of how interconnected everything is.
Exactly. And for you listening right now, if you are looking for that sudden aha moment, that feeling of seeing how global history connects without getting bogged down in an overwhelming sea of dates and textbook chapters, this is exactly the story you want to hear.
Because this one building neatly organizes thousands of years of human endeavor under a single roof.
It really does. Okay, let's unpack this. Where exactly does the story of the Stromness Museum actually begin?
Well, to understand the museum, you really have to understand what was happening to the town of Stromness in the mid-19th century.
Right.
The 1850s brought this explosive population boom to the Orkney Islands. And that growth wasn't driven by industry in the traditional sense, like coal or steel.
It was fish, right.
Yeah, it was driven entirely by the herring fishing industry. The waters around Orkney were incredibly rich, and the sheer volume of fish being pulled from the sea brought massive, unprecedented wealth into this remote community.
And obviously, when a town suddenly gets an influx of wealth and people, the local infrastructure has to adapt.
Precisely. The growth was so rapid that by 1856, Stromness officially became what was known in Scotland as a police burgh.
A police burgh. What exactly does that mean?
So essentially, the town had grown too large and too complex to be managed by a distant county authority. Becoming a police burgh meant they had the legal right to establish their own local municipal government.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, to handle things like paving, lighting, cleansing, and, well, actual law enforcement.
Which means they suddenly needed a place to put that new government.
Right. They needed a headquarters. So the newly formed local borough council commissioned a town hall. It was completed in 1858, and it was designed to reflect their new civic pride,
Yeah.
They built it in this very imposing neoclassical style, constructed entirely out of ashlar stone.
Let's pause on that for a second. Ashlar stone isn't just like a pile of rough rocks stacked together, is it?
No, not at all. Ashlar refers to stone that has been carefully cut and worked until it is perfectly square and smooth.
Oh.
Yeah, when you build a facade out of ashlar stone, you are intentionally trying to create a formal, permanent, and highly structured look. It was, frankly, a massive architectural flex for a fishing town.
A huge flex.
Definitely. In fact, it's such a significant piece of historic architecture that today it's a Category B listed building, meaning it's officially recognized and protected on a national level in Scotland.
So they build this grand town hall for the new government. But the local council didn't actually get to keep the building to themselves, did they? They ended up in a bit of a roommate situation right from the start.
They did, yeah. You see, the Orkney Natural History Society had actually been founded 2 decades earlier, back in 1837.
Oh, so they were already around.
Exactly, by a group of passionate local scholars and collectors. So when this grand new town hall was finished in 1858, an arrangement was made. The Burgh Council took over the ground floor to handle all the municipal paperwork and local law enforcement,
Right.
while the Natural History Society moved their growing museum into the first floor upstairs.
It sounds a bit like a modern tech startup sharing a co-working space with the local city council.
That's actually a great way to put it.
You've got the bureaucratic machine operating downstairs, and upstairs you have this passionate, slightly obsessive group of people just hoarding natural history specimens. And the museum, the startup in this scenario, they ultimately won the real estate battle.
They completely outlasted their landlords.
Yeah.
Fast forward to the 1920s, and the Burg Council ended up relocating to a different facility.
Leaving the whole place empty.
Right. That allowed the Orkney Natural History Society to acquire ownership of the entire building. They expanded their exhibits downwards, taking over the old government spaces, and hosted a grand reopening in February 1931.
And that was a pretty big deal, right?
Oh, absolutely. It was officiated by Alfred Bakey, the Lord Lieutenant of Orkney and Shetland.
Which means he was the British monarch's personal representative in the region. That gives the whole operation a very serious stamp of royal approval.
It really does.
And the museum is still operating out of that exact same building today, right?
Yes, it is. But its operational structure is what makes it so unique now. Today, it is a Scottish Charitable Incorporated Organization, or SCIO. But more importantly, it is managed entirely by a volunteer committee.
Just volunteers?
Yeah. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the fact that this is a volunteer enterprise completely shifts how we usually think about historical preservation. We have been conditioned to assume that world-class knowledge preservation requires a massive, faceless state bureaucracy.
Right, with millions of dollars in centralized funding.
Exactly. But the Stromness Museum proves that history can be driven by a passionate, local, grassroots community. This isn't a state mandate. It is a labor of intense local pride.
And that local pride makes a lot of sense when you consider what was actually coming into their harbor. Because the same sea that brought the herring and the wealth to build that town hall also brought global traffic.
Oh, absolutely.
Stromness wasn't just a secluded fishing village, it was a major maritime crossroads. Which brings us to the actual artifacts inside the building.
This is exactly where the deeply local narrative expands into a global one. The ethnographic and exploration collections held in Stromness rival what you would expect to see in a major national capital.
Let's talk about Captain James Cook. His third voyage, the one famous for exploring the Pacific, actually has ties to this small Scottish town.
It does, yeah.
When Cook's ships, the Resolution and the Discovery, were finally returning home to Britain in 1780, they actually landed in Stromness. And artifacts from that specific voyage are sitting in this local museum today.
Which is incredible.
It is. They also have ethnographic items collected by prominent Orcadians who traveled the world, like William Balfour Beatty, who explored the Niger River in Africa, and Jack Renton, who had this unbelievable journey living in the Solomon Islands in the South Pacific.
The breadth of the collection is just staggering. But the true crown jewel of their exploration history is tied to the Arctic.
Right, the Arctic expeditions.
Yeah. During the 19th century, there was a massive, highly publicized effort by the British to map the extreme north and navigate the Northwest Passage.
A huge deal at the time.
Oh, the space race of its day. The museum holds items related to the famous Orcadian explorer John Ray, who actually discovered the final portion of that passage. They also have a fascinating collection of artifacts belonging to the indigenous peoples of northern Canada, which were brought back by these same explorers.
And the survival gear they have on display is mind-blowing. The sources highlight something called a Halkett boat.
Ah, yes. An incredibly rare piece of engineering.
The museum has one of only 2 Halkett boats known to still exist anywhere in the world. For you listening, imagine a 19th century precursor to an inflatable survival raft.
But highly experimental.
Very. It was designed to be worn like a heavy waterproof cloak or carried like a specialized umbrella while trekking across the frozen Canadian tundra. Then, when the explorer reached a freezing river, they would inflate the cloak using a bellows, turning it into a one-man rubber boat.
It's bizarre.
It is bizarre, it is genius, and it's sitting in Stromness. They even have an authentic Arctic medal awarded to the legendary and ultimately doomed explorer John Franklin.
Yeah, the Franklin expedition.
I have to ask the obvious question here, though. Captain Cook was sailing for the British Admiralty. John Franklin was a national hero. Wouldn't the Crown demand that all of these incredibly valuable artifacts go straight into the vaults of the British Museum in London? Like, how did a small-town council manage to legally capture and keep all this world history?
Well, it wasn't a matter of legal maneuvering, really. It was a matter of practical geography and human nature. Look at where Orkney is positioned. In the 19th century, Stromness was the literal last stop of civilization before ships sailed into the terrifying unknown of the Arctic ice.
It was the edge of the map.
Exactly. It was the ultimate frontier outpost. If you were commanding an expedition, Stromness was the last place you could take on fresh water. And crucially, the last place you could hire experienced Orcadian ice navigators who actually knew how to survive in freezing waters.
That makes total sense.
And If you were lucky enough to survive the Arctic, Stromness was the very first piece of solid, civilized ground you stepped onto when you returned.
So the explorers formed personal relationships with the town.
They did. They stayed in local lodging houses, they traded, they drank in the local pubs. Many of these artifacts weren't official government property, they were personal souvenirs.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. An explorer might use an ethnographic carving from the South Pacific or an Inuit artifact from the Arctic to pay a local family for a month of lodging. Over decades, those individual items trickled out of local living rooms and were donated straight to the Orkney Natural History Society.
So the geography made Orkney the perfect jumping-off point for explorers. But that exact same geography, being this vital strategic harbor at the top of the British Isles, also made it a massive focal point when global warfare broke out a few decades later.
Yes, the narrative of Stromness shifts very suddenly here, from the peaceful but dangerous scientific exploration of the 19th century to the violent, mechanized global conflicts of the 20th century.
Right in Orkney's backyard. The museum has an entire collection dedicated to local naval history, specifically centered around Scapa Flow.
And for context, Scapa Flow is a vast natural harbor surrounded by the Orkney Islands. It is sheltered, deep, and large enough to hold an entire armada.
Wow.
Because of that, it became the primary base for the British Grand Fleet during both the First and Second World Wars.
And the Stromness Museum holds artifacts pulled directly from that water. They have items from sunken Royal Navy ships, but also artifacts from the scuttled German fleet.
That's a huge piece of history.
It is. After World War I, 74 ships of the German High Seas Fleet were interned at Scapa Flow. Believing that the British were about to seize the ships permanently, the German commander ordered his own men to intentionally sink the entire fleet in a single day. The wreckage is still down there.
It is a profound historical event to have situated just a few miles from your town hall.
The sources mention one specific artifact that caught my eye. It's an instrument recovered from the dreadnought battleship, HMS Vanguard, which tragically blew up while anchored at Scapa Flow in 1917 due to an accidental magazine explosion.
Yes, a terrible tragedy.
The artifact is called a Dumaresque. Now, a Dumaresque sounds like a very delicate, highly sophisticated French dessert.
It does sound like that.
But it is actually a vital piece of naval technology, isn't it?
It is entirely mechanical, yes. A Dumaresque was an analog calculating instrument.
Right. It's essentially an early mechanical targeting computer. Imagine a highly complex brass slide rule covered in dials and moving parts.
Yeah, that's a good way to picture.
It was designed to calculate the geometry between your moving battleship and an enemy's moving battleship, so you could figure out exactly where to aim your massive naval guns to hit a target miles away. So, what does this all mean? When you take a piece of rusted targeting equipment off a sunken dreadnought and put it in a local museum, does having pieces of these massive warships change how we process the sheer terrifying scale of global naval warfare?
I think it alters our perspective completely. When we read about the world wars in traditional history books, the numbers are so large that they become abstract.
Yeah, just statistics.
Exactly. Hundreds of ships, thousands of sailors, vast oceans. The human brain struggles to process that level of industrial conflict. It just becomes a list of numbers.
Yeah.
But when you walk into a quiet stone building in Stromness and you look at an intricate oxidized brass dial from the HMS Vanguard,
It's real.
it strips away the abstraction. It grounds those massive conflicts into a very visceral, tangible reality. The rusted metal of world-altering wars was pulled straight from the local bay. For the people of Orkney, global history isn't something that happened over there on a distant continent. It is deeply, physically local memory.
You can almost feel the weight of the steel and smell the oil. It's heavy. But here's the twist. As fascinating as the naval battles and the Arctic survival gear are, the museum's most shocking secrets don't actually involve ships at all.
No, they involve the ground beneath our feet and the archives behind the exhibition doors.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at their natural history collection. Remember, the Orkney Natural History Society was founded way back in 1837.
Right, they've been at this a while.
They've been collecting biological specimens in geology for nearly 2 centuries. The foundational items are exactly what you'd expect from a Victorian-era society. Thousands of taxidermied birds, extensive fossil collections, and rare mollusks.
And many of these were painstakingly gathered by dedicated local figures. You have individuals like Charles Clouston, a local clergyman and meteorologist who systematically recorded early weather data and collected geology.
Oh, sure.
Or Robert Rendell, a local poet and amateur concholigist who obsessively cataloged the shells and mollusks of the Orkney shores.
They even hold a specimen of Homosteus milleri, which is a massive, heavily armored fish fossil from the Devonian period, famously discovered by the pioneering Scottish geologist Hugh Miller.
A very impressive piece.
So far, this is a very standard, highly respectable 19th century natural history society. But let's fast forward to the modern era. The year is 2016. Someone is conducting a routine review of the museum's Skara Brae collection.
Skara Brae being the incredibly well-preserved Stone Age settlement in Orkney, which, just for context, actually predates the Egyptian pyramids.
Right. So a researcher is going through cardboard storage boxes from Skara Brae, and inside one of them, they find a 5,000-year-old Neolithic whalebone figurine.
Just sitting there.
Just sitting there. It was literally in what the staff described as the last box they checked.
A completely priceless artifact of early human history that had long been considered completely lost.
And if that isn't wild enough, let's jump to 2020. Researchers from the National Museum of Scotland are examining the Straumas collection, and they suddenly identify 2 Egyptian faience shabtis.
Faience is this ancient crushed quartz paste that gets fired with a glaze.
Usually a brilliant turquoise color, right?
Yeah, exactly. And a shabti is a small funerary figure that ancient Egyptians buried with their dead, believing the figure would magically come alive and do manual labor for the deceased in the afterlife.
And researchers found 2 of these ancient Egyptian figures dating all the way back to between 1145 and 986 BC.
In Orkney.
Sitting in a small museum in the Scottish Islands, it is the equivalent of cleaning out your attic, moving aside a box of your old tax documents, and finding a literal dinosaur bone underneath it.
It really is.
But I'm struggling to understand something here. You mentioned this society has been running since 1837. How on earth does a museum simply lose a priceless 5,000-year-old Neolithic whalebone carving or 3,000-year-old Egyptian shabtis for an entire century? Weren't they keeping records?
Well, this raises an important question, and it addresses one of the most fundamental misunderstandings about how historical archives actually function. The general public tends to view museums as, pristine, static display cases.
Yeah, like everything is perfectly cataloged.
Right. You assume that what is clearly labeled behind the glass is the entirety of the institution's knowledge. But the reality of archival science is incredibly messy.
How messy are we talking?
Think about the sheer volume of material. For over a century and a half, local citizens, returning sailors, bored explorers, and wealthy travelers were constantly dropping off items at the museum's doorstep.
Just a constant influx.
It was a relentless tsunami of artifacts. Now remember that this is a local volunteer-run society. They did not have an army of specialized PhDs or modern database software to properly identify, cross-reference, and catalog every single rock, bone, and carving that came through the door.
Oh, they just had to triage everything.
Exactly. Things got boxed up quickly to save space. They got labeled vaguely. An incredibly rare 3,000-year-old Egyptian shabti might simply be recorded in a dusty ledger as small carved green stone donated by Mr. Smith, 1892.
Oh, man.
And then that box gets put on a high shelf in a back room. It can sit in the dark for generations, perfectly safe, but completely unrecognized.
Just waiting.
It just waits there until the right researcher, someone with the specific, highly specialized expertise to look at that greenstone and instantly recognize its true historical weight, finally opens that exact box.
So the museum isn't just preserving history from the elements, it's actively hiding history from itself until the time is right.
It's a beautiful way to phrase it.
Which perfectly wraps up exactly why we wanted to take this deep dive today. Think about the incredible, sprawling journey we just took for you listening, all by examining the contents of one single building.
It's been quite a trip.
We started with an 1850s herring boom that forced a small Scottish town to build an ashlar stone town hall. We saw that civic building become a roommate to a startup natural history society. We tracked Captain Cook's return voyage from the Pacific. We examined experimental inflatable lifeboats designed for Arctic survival.
And we felt the heavy metallic ghosts of sunken dreadnoughts from the global conflicts of the 20th century.
All of that existing alongside lost ancient Egyptian funerary figures and 5,000-year-old Neolithic carvings.
All of it contained, protected, and managed by a dedicated committee of local volunteers in Stromness, Scotland.
It's just unbelievable.
It serves as a profound reminder for you as you listen to this. True learning and world-class history aren't just confined to the giant, heavily funded national institutions in major capitals. Knowledge is everywhere.
It really is.
It is woven directly into the fabric of small towns, and it is often preserved purely by the sheer, stubborn dedication of local volunteers who care deeply about their community's place in the wider world.
The history of the world isn't always kept in an impenetrable vault. Sometimes it's kept in the room right above the Old Town Council. And that leaves us with a final, lingering thought for you to ponder long after we wrap up today. If a tiny, volunteer-run local museum in the Orkney Islands has ancient Egyptian artifacts and 5,000-year-old Neolithic carvings that were just sitting safely in an unmarked cardboard box until a few years ago, what unrecognized, world-altering history is sitting in the attics, basements, or local historical societies of your own hometown right now, just waiting for someone to finally open that last box?